For 53 years, one man built one of the most powerful churches in America, from 50 members in a storefront into a 24,000-member cathedral empire on Crenshaw Boulevard. He counseled presidents. He led 6 million believers as the head of an entire denomination. And then, in a matter of 2 years, he revealed a decade-long secret health battle. Stepped away from national leadership, handed his pulpit to his own son, and left behind a trail of lawsuits and unanswered questions that are still shaping the future of Black megachurch culture in Los Angeles today. This is the real story of Bishop Charles E. Blake Sr., West Angeles Church of God in Christ, and the controversial new era now unfolding in his place. To understand the controversy, you first have to understand the scale of what Blake actually built, because it is almost hard to believe. In 1969, a 29-year-old Charles Blake was asked by his father and by Bishop Samuel Crouch to take over as pastor of West Angeles Church of God in Christ, a small congregation with only about 50 members. 15 of whom reportedly left the moment he was announced as the new pastor. That is not exactly the origin story of a religious empire. But over the following 5 decades, Blake transformed that tiny storefront congregation into one of the largest and most influential Black churches in the Western United States, eventually claiming a membership north of 24,000 people. In 1999, the church dedicated a stunning new sanctuary at 3600 Crenshaw Boulevard, a 5,000-seat cathedral built from granite, travertine marble, and stained glass, with a cross tower rising more than 100 feet above the Crenshaw corridor. The final price tag on that building came in at $65 million. With roughly half of that funding coming directly from everyday members giving $10 and $20 at a time over the years. This was not old money. This was a congregation building an institution brick by brick, dollar by dollar in the heart of South Los Angeles. And West Angeles didn't just become big, it became famous, drawing a level of celebrity attention that few churches in America can claim. Denzel Washington and Paletta Washington, Angela Bassett and Courtney Vance, Stevie Wonder, Natalie Cole. And perhaps most visibly of all, Los Angeles Lakers legend Earvin Magic Johnson and his wife Cookie, who became deeply embedded members of the congregation for more than 3 decades. Beyond the celebrity pews, Blake himself became one of the most nationally significant Black religious leaders in America, eventually rising in 2007 to become the presiding bishop of the entire Church of God in Christ denomination, commonly known as COGIC, one of the largest Pentecostal bodies in the world with millions of members. He was appointed by President Obama to serve on the White House's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. He founded Save Africa's Children, a humanitarian program supporting hundreds of orphan care centers across sub-Saharan Africa. By almost any measure, Charles Blake was not just a local pastor. He was a national institution unto himself. But institutions of that size and that wealth almost never escape controversy, and West Angeles was no exception. One of the most serious legal battles Blake faced came from within his own denomination. In October of 2016, a lawsuit seeking $15 million was filed against Blake and 2 other church leaders by Superintendent Milton Joyner and Anthony Spence of Pacific Mount Olive Church of God in Christ, a separate Los Angeles congregation. According to the allegations laid out in the suit, Blake and his co-defendants conspired to seize control of Pacific Mount Olive's church buildings and its other properties, including an apartment complex, essentially accusing denominational leadership of using its structural power to force out a local congregation and take over its valuable real estate. The lawsuit shined an uncomfortable light on a broader, uglier pattern that has surfaced repeatedly within COGIC over the years. Disputes between bishops and local congregations over who ultimately owns church property when a denomination's national leadership and a local pastor disagree. It's worth noting that around this same period, Blake was also fighting and winning. A separate and unrelated defamation lawsuit against a Florida minister named Earl Carter, who had waged what court records described as a year-long campaign attacking Blake's character, his sexuality, and his handling of church funds. A federal judge ultimately ruled in Blake's favor, ordering Carter's defamatory videos and posts removed from the internet entirely. Two very different lawsuits, but both illustrating just how much scrutiny, both legitimate and malicious, tends to follow leaders who sit atop this much money, this much real estate, and this much institutional power. Then, in October of 2020, came a decision that surprised much of the gospel world. Blake announced that, after serving as COGIC's presiding bishop since 2007, having been re-elected multiple times, he would not seek another term. He requested emeritus status instead, officially stepping down from the denomination's highest office in March of 2021 and handing the position to Bishop J. Drew Sherd Sr. At the time, Blake was 80 years old, and he framed the decision publicly as a natural transition. A chance to focus his remaining energy on his home congregation at West Angeles rather than the demanding, politically complicated work of overseeing a national denomination with millions of members and thousands of individual church properties scattered across the country. But denominational leadership of that scale is never simple, and COGIC in particular has a long, well-documented history of internal governance disputes, competing jurisdictional interests, and structural tension between bishops. Stepping away from that seat, even gracefully, inevitably raised questions among close observers of COGIC culture about just how much of the decision was about age and legacy planning, and how much was about the sheer exhaustion of managing that level of institutional friction. Then, about a year and a half later, the full picture became clear, and it reframed everything that came before it. On April 24th of 2022, standing before his own congregation with his wife, Lady May Blake, at his side, Bishop Blake revealed that he had been privately living with Parkinson's disease for 10 years. 10 years. Meaning he had been managing this progressive neurological condition through nearly his entire second term as COGIC's presiding bishop, through major building projects, through international humanitarian work, all while keeping the diagnosis almost entirely out of the public eye. In his own written statement released the following day, he acknowledged that the disease was increasingly affecting his physical stature and his vocal strength, but he expressed determination to keep serving in whatever capacity he could. In that same announcement, he revealed that he would be retiring as senior pastor of West Angeles after more than 50 years in the role, passing day-to-day leadership to his sons, Charles Blake II and Lawrence Blake, while continuing to remain involved in counseling, prayer, and worship as what he called a semi-retired presence. It was a rare and vulnerable moment for a man who had spent decades as one of the most powerful figures in American Pentecostalism, and it instantly reframed years of speculation about his health, his energy, and his gradual withdrawal from the national stage. That set the stage for what came next: the official installation of Blake's own son as senior pastor. In September of 2022, the church formally announced that after 53 years of leadership, Bishop and Lady Blake were stepping down as spiritual leaders and passing the mantle to their son, Elder Charles Blake II, and his wife, Lady Deandra Blake. The transition wasn't sudden. Blake II had spent 13 years working inside the church as Director of Community Relations and later as Assistant Pastor, before being formally appointed co-pastor back in November of 2021, giving him roughly a year of shared leadership experience before taking the reins entirely. He held a Master of Divinity degree from the same seminary his father had attended decades earlier. On October 23, 2022, following a full honor and celebration weekend at the Cathedral featuring appearances from West Angeles' most famous members, including Magic and Cookie Johnson, and Courtney Vance and Angela Bassett, Charles Blake II was officially installed as senior pastor. And here is where the controversy that so many observers have quietly pointed to comes into focus. Dynastic succession, a father passing an enormous religious institution directly to his son, is extremely common across large independent and Pentecostal churches in America. It happens constantly, and there is nothing inherently improper about it. But when the institution in question controls tens of millions of dollars in real estate, commands a media platform reaching hundreds of thousands of people, and wields genuine political and cultural influence across an entire city, that kind of family handoff inevitably invites scrutiny about whether the decision was made purely on spiritual merit or whether structural convenience. Family loyalty and institutional self-preservation played a role as well. It is a debate that has quietly followed Black megachurch culture for years, and West Angeles is now one of its most visible modern examples. Money, of course, sits at the center of almost every conversation about churches this size, and West Angeles has never shied away from big financial milestones, even the ones that invite criticism. In January of 2020, the church achieved something remarkable. It officially burned the mortgage on its $65 million cathedral, paying off the debt entirely during a celebration that also marked Bishop and Lady Blake's 51st pastoral anniversary. Thousands of members packed the cathedral for the event. Grammy-winning gospel artist Kurt Carr performed, and prominent members, including Magic and Cookie Johnson, along with the church's own leadership team, were credited with playing key roles in the campaign that ultimately saw the congregation donate more than $30 million toward eliminating the debt. It's a genuinely impressive achievement of collective giving. But it also underscores the central tension that follows every prosperity-adjacent megachurch in America. How does an institution built and sustained largely by working and middle-class Black families in South Los Angeles reconcile decades of nine-figure construction projects, mortgage-burning celebrations, and celebrity-studded events with its surrounding neighborhood's ongoing economic struggles? To his credit, Blake has generally steered clear of the most extreme strains of prosperity theology, the kind of teaching that promises believers guaranteed wealth and freedom from hardship in exchange for enough faith and enough giving. West Angeles has instead built an extensive community development arm, becoming one of the largest affordable housing developers in South Los Angeles, operating more than 80 outreach programs and partnering with real estate firms like Sim Group on projects intended to bring new housing and retail investment to the historically underserved Crenshaw corridor. Whether that development work fully answers the broader cultural debate about wealth, gentrification, and the role of the Black church in neighborhoods undergoing rapid change is a conversation that is still very much ongoing, and West Angeles remains squarely in the middle of it. So where does that leave the church and the man who built it today? Bishop Charles E. Blake Sr. is now in his mid-80s, publicly living with Parkinson's disease, holding the title of Presiding Bishop Emeritus of COGIC and Senior Pastor Emeritus of West Angeles, still appearing at services, still preaching in rotation alongside his sons whenever his health allows, and still, by all accounts, deeply respected across the denomination he helped shape for nearly 2 decades. His son, Charles Blake II, now leads a congregation of more than 25,000 members, continuing the community development work, continuing the real estate partnerships along Crenshaw Boulevard, and now carrying the weight of proving that West Angeles' next chapter can honor his father's 53-year legacy while charting its own path forward. The lawsuits, the succession questions, the wealth, and the health revelations are not separate stories. They are all threads of the same larger narrative. What happens to a Black megachurch, its money, its property, and its public image when the singular, larger-than-life founder who built it finally has to let go? West Angeles' new era is still being written. And if the last few years are any indication, it will continue to be watched extremely closely, both by the faithful who fill its pews every Sunday and by the critics who continue to question how power, family, and fortune intersect inside America's most influential Black churches. If this breakdown of the real story behind West Angeles Church of God in Christ and Bishop Charles Blake's controversial new era gave you a deeper understanding of one of America's most influential megachurches, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more investigative deep dives into faith, power, and money in America. And let us know in the comments what part of this story surprised you the most. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.